Okay, fantastic. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Maya Powell. Thank you so much for being here today, this morning, this evening, this afternoon, whenever it is for you. We have such an international audience for this event, and we're so excited. Um, I am a member of the International Coral Reef Society Student and Early Career Chapter, and I'll be helping facilitate this workshop today. We are so excited to share this amazing collaboration between the ICRS and Dr. Asha de Vos. And we're going to be addressing the detrimental impacts of parachute science and generating inclusive and equitable ideas for future research. So a bit of background about our organization, and I want to say a few thank yous as well before we get started. The goal of the ICRS is to promote the acquisition and dissemination of scientific knowledge to secure coral reefs for future generations. And our student and early career chapter specifically focuses on supporting, creating support and resources for our student and early career researchers. So there's several committees that work within the student and early career chapter. And this workshop today is a joint effort between the Skills and Professional Development Committee and the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. And I wanted to extend just a quick thank you to everyone who has been involved in the planning and dissemination of information for this workshop, including SPD, EDI, all of the social media committees, the steering committee, and especially Michelle Taylor, Mark Eakin, and the ICRS Council. And then all of our amazing discussion moderators who are volunteering their time today. Lastly, I want to thank our wonderful speaker, Dr. Asha de Vos, for being our keynote speaker today. We really look forward to learning from you. So a brief schedule overview for the day. We will first have our keynote seminar with a brief period for questions. Then we'll transition to the interactive portion of our workshop. For this, you'll be randomly assigned into breakout rooms where our moderators will facilitate a discussion around 3 themes: reflection on your experiences, strategies for addressing parachute science, and building a plan for an equitable and just future research. Lastly, we'll come back together to quickly share and close. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Asha de Vos. She is an internationally acclaimed Sri Lankan marine biologist who's done incredible research on blue whales. She is the founder of the marine conservation group Ocean Swell and is an international advocate for equity, justice, and inclusion in science. She's a recent author of her new book, Ocean, From the Shore to the Abyss, which I encourage all of you to check out. And she's received so many awards and accolades for both her research as well as her outreach and equity work, such as being the Equity and Diversity Champion for the British Ecological Society, and has recently joined the UN Secretary General's Scientific Advisory Board, along with countless others. I wish I had time to list them all. Asha is really at the forefront of research and advocacy on combating parachute science, and we're so excited to hear from her on her work today. So without further ado, Dr. Asha de Vos.
All right, awesome. Hello, everybody. I'm going to now try to figure out. Oh, we got sharing. Okay, perfect. Okay, my desktop is an absolute mess. Give me 1 second. Share. What do you see? Do you just see the screen?
We see your presentation, yes.
Just the single screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, great. Okay, I can't see my face, so I don't even know what I'm doing with my expressions, but anyway, let's keep going. Hi, everybody. Oh, I found us. That's fine. I've done this so many times. You'd think I'd have mastered it, but no. Hello, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here. I am not Maya Powell, in case you're wondering, and Maya does not have a doppelganger all the way in Sri Lanka. We are unclear what's going on, but I can guarantee that I am Asha de Vos. And I'm speaking to you from beautiful tropical Sri Lanka, which is such a relevant place to have to sit and have this conversation from, I think. It's so great to see all you people in the room. Like, I had a look at the list and there's old friends in there. There's lots of new people also. So I'm super happy that I'm able to share this conversation with all of you. and, provoke some thought, because I think we can all just do better, right? And if we do better, then we can make the differences that we need to make. Okay. So without much further ado, I'm going to jump right in. Let's see. Okay, so I wanted to be an adventurous scientist. That was kind of like the dream, right? I wanted to go where no one else would ever go and see what no one else would ever see. Unfortunately, despite coming from a beautiful tropical island in the heart of the Indian Ocean, most people thought that was a foolish dream. Sri Lankans were like, oh, what? There's no scope for marine science in the country. So people were dissuading me here on the ground. And then, of course, I couldn't see, anything beyond that. But in my mind, I thought, like we have 8 times more ocean area than land area. So, why wouldn't I kind of pursue a career in this space? So to study marine biology, unfortunately, I had to leave the country. So I went to St. Andrews. This is me at 18, many decades ago, fresh-faced and probably freezing at the time. And I went off to St. Andrews in Scotland to do a degree in marine science, right? Marine and environmental biology, to be specific. Anyway, so as we all do, go to university, learn a lot of things, right? And then it's all textbooks. We do some practicals. It's all great. But I really, at that point, after I finished, I was like, what does it really mean to be a marine biologist, right? Like, what does it feel like? Like beyond what the books are telling me. So anyway, I went off and I started to look for opportunities to get out on the ocean and sort of like experience marine biology, like the practical side. And so, long story short, I went off to New Zealand, worked on a bunch of projects. I picked New Zealand because I have a very weak passport, and I acknowledge that there are probably others in this room who understand what that feels like. And to go anywhere in the world, I think I can go to 2 countries in the world without applying for a visa like months in advance and giving in hundreds of sheets of paper to prove that I'm not going to illegally stay somewhere. And so New Zealand was kind enough to say, okay, you can have 6 months visa and stay here to work on volunteer projects, right? So I had to pick my opportunities also based on like what my citizenship basically reflected to the world. And this is a problem I think that I'm not talking about specifically, but I think it's something that we all struggle with in the kind of work that we do, a lot of us, right? Anyway, while I was in New Zealand living in a tent, working on research projects, which is a story for another day, I learned about this whale research vessel that was circumnavigating the globe. And it was a US vessel, and it was going to across the world, tracking sperm whales. And I was like, this sounds like an amazing experience. And one of my professors from St. Andrews at the time sent me an email and said they're coming to the Maldives and Sri Lanka, and you should try to get on, right? So I was like, obviously, right? Like, why wouldn't I try? So, I went off to an internet cafe and sent off my email, and I was like, I'm a Sri Lankan marine biologist. I really want to work with whales. I would really love to join your team when you come to my country, right? And I was like, surely this is going to be easy. And, a couple of days later, I got a response, and it was like, sorry, but no, right? And I was like, how odd. They were an American vessel with Europeans and Americans on board coming to my country in Sri Lanka to do research in my country on whales that were using our shores, at least part of the time. And they didn't have any Sri Lankans on board, and yet they were denying me the opportunity to get on board. So then I thought I'd negotiate, right? So I actually wrote to them every day for the next 3 months until they let me on board. Okay. So the lesson here is not to harass people with emails. I want to put that out there because immediately people are like, oh my gosh, I'm going to write to them every day for 3 months. That's not going to work. But what I did was I bargained, right? I bargained and I kept saying, like, look, I'll never get this experience. The last time a research vessel working on whales was in my country, it was 30 years before that. And I was like, just give me the chance. I'll do anything. I'll work on anything, whatever, right? And so they finally said, fine, right? You can come on board if you can get to the Maldives in 24 hours. Anyway, so I rushed off, and then they told me I was going to be a deckhand. So I actually started my career polishing, cleaning toilets and polishing brass. And that's kind of what it was. And they invited me on the basis that that's what I would do. And from where I sat at that point, like a lot of people were like, why would you do that? You want to be a scientist. And I was like, do you know what? Like, I just need to get on that boat. Once I'm on that boat, I'll prove to them that I can be a scientist. So then I got upgraded from deckhand to also science intern, which was quite an exciting thing for me. But then, it was on this boat that I had this incredible eureka moment that really paved the way for the career that I have now. And so, like I said, we were tracking sperm whales. And what we were doing was we were dropping hydrophones in the water and tracking them acoustically. And then when we'd find them, we'd take these tiny biopsy samples and to understand the toxicology of the marine environment. And so while we're on this expedition, obviously we're listening, but during daylight hours, we also have someone up on deck looking out for signs of life. And on this particular day of significance, I happened to be that person. I was up on deck scanning the horizon. I mean, it was a beautiful, flat, calm day back in 2003. You can see the water was like barely a ripple in sight, right? Just super like calm, really hot, as you can imagine, no wind. And I was looking out because I could hear this cacophony of sperm whales, and because we'd play their calls on a loudspeaker in the vessel. And I was like, I need to find these animals. And I was like so excited. And then, and I knew what I was looking for, a low bushy blow slanted off onto the left-hand side. And sperm whales have one blowhole because they're toothed whales and it's on the left-hand side of the head. So when they exhale, it goes off to the left-hand side. And so I knew what to look for, right? Because I'd worked in the Maldives for 2 weeks already and I was like super stoked. But my shift was coming to an end and I was kind of stressed out about that. And then I kind of like was about to pack up and head down when I saw this in the distance. A tall, powerful vertical blow that went all the way to the sky as far as I could tell, right? And I looked at it and I was like, this can only be an animal that's incredibly large and powerful, right? And I was really excited. So I grabbed the walkie-talkie and I called my captain and I said, Bob, I think, 11 o'clock, 2 kilometers, let's go. And he said, why? And I said, I think it's a blue whale, right? So now I'm the deckhand, right? So like I'm thinking, gosh, is this the best idea to like send them totally off course? We have these like beautiful transects all drawn out. And I'm like, no, but we're going that way because I think perhaps maybe we saw a blue whale, right? And luckily for me, Bob was very generous and he was like, no, that's fine. He turns the vessel. We start going and I'm panicking because I don't want to lose sight of this animal. We're moving closer and closer. And then I think I'm losing my mind because it's not at all what I expected to see, right? It wasn't just one blue whale. There were like 6 blue whales in an area the size of a soccer pitch, right? And in my mind, I was like, wait a second, like these are the largest animals to ever roam the planet. They can roam over 70%, right, of our planet. But they're like here, like crammed together in a relatively small space. And I was like, what are they doing? And so, like, at that point, I was straight out of undergrad. So I was like very confident that I had all the answers. I'm sure many of us have felt that way at some point in our careers, or perhaps right now feeling that way. And I was like, oh, the textbooks and professors say that large whales go to cold places to feed, and they come to warm places like Sri Lanka to breed and calve. And I was like, that's it. I'm going to be the first person on the planet to see blue whales mating, right? So obviously I was pretty stoked about that. Anyway, we get closer and closer to the sighting, and I'm like hanging off the front of the boat, and that's not at all what's in sight. We see these 6 blue whales, which is really cool, but they're not, definitely there's no babies, and there's 100% no mating, because I think you'd know if whales were mating, right? I don't think that would be something we could hide. And so I told Bob, I said, hey, can we hang around here for a little bit longer? And he says, fine. And because now we've already gone off course. So like, what else is there to lose, right? And then that's the point when I saw this incredible, and I don't know why I don't have a slide of it because this is what I'm well known for, is my love for whale poop. And Esteban in the room has generously worn a red top, which is actually the color of whale poop. Okay, that will stay with you all forever. And it's bright red. And that's when I saw this big patch of whale poop. And I was like, what is going on, right? Because like I said, blue whales are supposed to go to cold waters to feed. But if they're pooping, that means they're feeding close, right? So I was like, this is nuts, right? There is something special going on. This population has figured out how to feed in these warm tropical waters. It's not what our textbooks and our professors are saying. Like, I think this is exciting. So I reached out to scientists in the global north because they had experience and expertise in the subject, and we didn't have any in Sri Lanka, right? Like I said, people didn't even think there was anything to study in our oceans, so whatever. And I got this flurry of responses. It was so awesome to like open my inbox and get replies from these like big name scientists, about like this discovery. I was like, I think I've made a discovery. I think these blue whales are like feeding in these waters. They're not supposed to. Like, I think something special is happening. And they replied, and in a nutshell, they said, "This is so exciting. Can you get us a research permit so we can bring our teams to Sri Lanka to do the work?" And I was like, huh? Like, I'm super confused about what's happening here, right? And I'm like, wait, are they really getting me to like permit acquirer? Is that like the role they think I deserve? And in my head, I was like, I'm a Sri Lankan. I've made a discovery in Sri Lankan waters on a species that potentially is, spending all their time in Sri Lankan waters. Yet this is what they want of me. And, every day, I thank my 23-year-old self because I turned around and I was like, thank you, but no, right? Because I was at that moment, I was not ready to give up this discovery to someone to just swoop in and do the work. And I don't know what gave me the courage to do that. I don't know what gave me the foresight to do that. Whatever it was, I'm grateful because, I mean, why shouldn't it be me? Right? And so that's really where the story begins. And I think when I look back, that was my first like proper experience with parachute science. Okay. Parachute science, or some might call it colonial science, is where, and in this model, there's a few different models of this, but I'm going to talk from the global north, global south perspective, right? Or that interaction. And that's where people from the global north come to countries like mine, beautiful tropical destinations, exotic places with conservation challenges, and do work and leave without any long-term investment or consideration of the ground realities. The partnership is often built once resources like funding are already acquired. So that means it's too late to ensure equitable inclusion of local partners. The outsider, who's often the resource holder, will wield unequal power against those on the ground and often controls the narrative and the research agenda. This results in work that's not being aligned with the priorities on the ground, but with those of the outsider, enhancing their career trajectory, but derailing existing local conservation efforts. The issue is that, in a lot of our countries, there is work happening, but it's usually at a grassroots level, long-term, but grassroots, small shoestring budgets. And so we build the foundation for a lot of the work that then gets taken over and made something bigger with institutions and organizations that have bigger money, right? Bingos can often turn up in our countries. They will take over the research. They'll rebrand. They'll put stickers everywhere. And they don't even acknowledge that you've done anything. And the foundational work was done by people on the ground. And that creates issues because it creates a dependency on the external expertise, but it is unsustainable in the long term as well. And it gives this perception that people on the ground in countries like mine are not interested in the environment. They don't do any work, right? So why not? Why shouldn't we go there and work? They're not interested, but that's because of how the world comes in and takes over and that lack of humility that can drive some of that. So during COVID, right, this problem was really exacerbated. And I would sit on calls with like explorers, conservationists, researchers, storytellers, and listen to people complaining about the fact that, oh, I've got these massive holes in my data set because I can't fly to my field site to collect data. And in my head, I was like, you know what, buddy, had you like been more thoughtful and, kind of like provided the technical capacity to the teams on the ground who you work with, acknowledge that they're an integral part of your project, then they would have been able to collect the data for you, right? And then no holes in the data set. So I wrote this piece for Scientific American, like, locked up in my house, frustrated about how things were going. And it's called The Problem of Colonial Science. And I would encourage everyone just have a read. It's 1,000 words. It's a very personal narrative. It comes from very much my own experience, which I've talked about. But it's also become essential reading in some institutions and, universities, just because it's a short piece that kind of comes unusually from a very first person perspective. So the thing is, I've realized that coming from the global south means that the opportunities I've had and continue to have pale in comparison to my counterparts from the global north. But the biases I face and continue to face are many times more. I've had to work so much harder to be where I am today, and I'm not going to let it go to waste, which is why I walk into rooms like this and I talk openly about the problems around parachute science and also just my experience with it, because I hope that empowers other people, one, to speak out, two, for allies to join us to understand that things can be done better, right? And one of the most important things I've learned on this journey is that being from an underrepresented group it's not enough for me to realize my own goals and dreams, right? Of going to places no one else will ever go and seeing what no one else will ever see. If I'm not using this newfound hardened, privilege to make space and create opportunities for others like me. Because if I don't, history has shown me that no one else will. Our invisibility is only as powerful as our willingness to accept it. If we shrink back, no one sees us and we vanish. And that has historically been a problem. So that's why I actually built my organization, Oceanswell. It's Sri Lanka's first marine conservation research and education organization. But our tagline is Oceans for All Forever, because we believe that it's not just the species, it's not just the ecosystems, it's all of humanity, right? And our mission is to nurture the next generation of diverse ocean heroes and engage everyone in conversations about the magic of our world's oceans. So the reason I built it is because I was so tired of the standard bingos that had a very specific way of doing work, right? And I wanted to see if there were other ways to do it. And so my point here is that there is room for everyone. Now, I'm not saying you cannot work in another country. What I am saying is how you work in another country matters. Okay. And here, this is a picture of my colleague, Dr. Shane Guerrero. He is a sperm whale biologist, right? He's been running the Dominican sperm whale project for maybe almost 20 years now. And he supports our project in Sri Lanka. So all our project partners and all our projects do have an outsider where we see technical capacity is required, right? So we basically recognize the priorities on the ground. We build the ground, we acquire the funding, and then we look at the technical gaps, and then we invite people who aren't just good at what they do, but share our values, right? And are modest and have humility and recognize that they come in not as the face of the project, not as the PI, not as the first author, but they come in to help create a legacy that's much greater than that. They come in to help us train that next generation of diverse ocean heroes. So we're upskilling at a much faster rate. We're creating opportunities for more people, and so that more people can get into the field. At the end of the day, the ocean is the largest ecosystem on our planet. And we're not going to be successful at making a difference unless we're basically building the world's largest team, right? And for us to do that, it is essential for us to be thinking about how do we work with people who also share that vision, right? The harsh truth is that for too long, the voices, stories, and experiences of people from the global south and local and indigenous communities have been excluded or overridden in the spaces that I work, whether it's research or conservation or even storytelling in many cases. If we think about the oceans, the largest part of our planet, 70% of our coastlines are in the developing world. But representation from these parts of the world it's negligible, particularly at decision-making tables, right? Oftentimes I'll walk into rooms at whether it's the UN or whatever, and I will find myself almost burdened with the responsibility of representing 70% of our coastlines. That's disproportionate, the burden. And I say burden because I'm saying it shouldn't just be me. We should be having more people in the room, a representative sample of people from that part of the world who can come in to help make those decisions, right? We also know that blanket solutions don't work. So a group of people in, the US or Geneva coming up with like recommendations on how to combat, different things across the world, we can't export that and copy paste it. That's never going to work, right? But we do need all the voices in the room because it's all very context dependent. And in this context, I also want to highlight that we always talk about capacity building, right? These outsiders who come and build our capacity. And to me, that's like a horrible term, okay? Because it is capacity sharing. Basically, there's always capacity on the ground, right? Whether it's context or knowledge of like the ecosystem or the priorities on the ground, that is also capacity. We're asking people with technical capacity sometimes to step in. You need both of those. Without the contextual capacity, technical capacity is not going to function. It can't work in a vacuum. So we need all of it. So I like to use the word capacity sharing because I think that's actually what it is, right? It's a two-way process. And talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. So this lack of representation that we see in these big spaces is not a reflection of our capacity, lack of capacity, but it actually points to a broken system, one that sidelines and overlooks our greatest allies in the quest for a healthier ocean and planet that benefits us all. Now, on the flip side, we do have a issue with the lack of allyship from colleagues in the global south sometimes. Like sometimes when I talk out about this, I have colleagues in the global south who will kind of roll their eyes at me, right? And I'm doing it for the betterment of all of us. So it's always been confusing. But then I've also tried to like understand the problem. And I realized that sometimes it's because people from our parts of the world are afraid to speak out because they don't want to be victimized, right? I have been often called the crazy South Asian woman who has a huge issue with the way things are happening. So I've like experienced all of it. Or for them, sometimes they're worried that they'll lose the scarce opportunities that might come their way, right? Funding that might come their way. So I'm not asking everyone to tackle the problem in the same way, but I think we all need to start thinking about what role do we play and how do we fix this problem? Because a lot of the issues in our oceans are a result of the systemic problems. And if we fix the systemic problems, which are complex, that's when we're going to start to see change. Fundamentally, I think equity needs more voices and less excuses. And we have to be comfortable having these uncomfortable conversations because that is where growth happens and that's where we're going to see change. Right now, time is of the essence. We know the planet is in crisis. And so rather than wasting so much time othering each other, right, to exclude people, we should be opening doors to include people so we can actually see success in the work that we do. When I started off and I wanted to be an adventurous scientist, these are the faces that look back at me. And no doubt you will look at that array and think, funny, there's no one that resembles her, right? Look, at the end of the day, being able to see yourself in someone else is what often can inspire people to walk in these spaces, right? And I know, there's a saying, if you see it, you can be it. But sometimes I believe that if you can't see it, you need to be it so someone else can see it. Okay. And I think that for me was probably the path that I chose subconsciously. As a kid, these were the faces that looked at me, clearly didn't care, right? That they didn't matter. It was what they were doing that mattered. And these faces come with a lot of privilege, whether it's being able to travel the world with no restrictions or, various other things. And so these are things that we also have to learn to reflect on. What is the privilege I carry when I walk into a space? And how do I use that privilege for good, right? So the problem with a picture like this is when I started my work working with the whales in Sri Lanka, and I started advertising for Sri Lankan students to come work with me, I would get really no responses from Sri Lankans, okay? Because they did not see themselves in these spaces because they too were faced with these faces when they went on the internet or whatever, looking at whale research or marine biologists, right? And so I used to get a flurry of responses from foreign students. And so I used to give them opportunities, which has changed a lot now because the demographics have changed. But this is actually a terribly grainy screenshot. It's only from 2011. Obviously, it looks like it's much older because it's like terrible. But this is the first documentary that was made on my work in 2011 by Channel 7 Australia. And they did this like it's like a seven, I can't remember, 7 to 10 minute like little video on the work I was doing with the blue whales, right? And someone it aired, and then someone put it on YouTube, and I was a PhD student at the time, and in my first year, I think, and like it went viral, right? Like people were sending it around, whatever. And the coolest part was, people across the world wrote to me, and they were like, "You have blue whales in warm tropical Sri Lankan waters," and I was like, "That's right, right?" But more than that, it was that I had Sri Lankans write to me and say, "We have blue whales in our waters. Ma'am, I want to do what you do," right? I mean, the power of representation cannot be underestimated. Suddenly, people from my parts of the world, people from the region, were seeing someone that looked like them doing the things that they had never dreamt of because nobody afforded them that opportunity. Today, my teams look like this. I still get a flurry of replies. Even if I write the advert and I say, I'm looking for Sri Lankans to participate in the field expedition, you need the local languages, I still get applications from students across the world, right? But my priority is to invest in my country, to invest in my people. And as part of our projects, like I said, we always have these technical capacity enhancement through colleagues from across the world. We also try to set aside money to do training, right? So whether it's skills, quantitative skills or social science skills or acoustic skills, we try to run little training programs. So that way we're like building that team, that army, right? At a faster rate. It's not just one student who benefits, but it's all these other people. And in this photograph, actually, there's not just Sri Lankans, there's Maldivians, Indians, and even someone from the Seychelles, because I'm trying to look at how do we provide opportunities for the region, because our region hasn't had opportunities like this historically. So in 2023, the New York Times wrote to me and they were like, we'd like you to write a guest essay for our Turning Points pieces, right? And it's basically, like the ocean is on fire, basically, like the sea is getting so hot. Can you write a piece around that, right? Like the state of the ocean. And I was like, sure, right? And then I thought, like, as I said, the ocean is in the state it's in because we don't have enough people being able to participate in making a difference for the ocean. And when I say that, I don't mean everyone has to be a marine scientist or a marine conservationist. Everyone in their daily lives or whatever, you can be a banker, a baker, an accountant, you still can play a role in making a difference for the ocean. And I think we all know that, right? And for me, it's like, how do we open the space up for all these champions to make that difference? So I wrote this piece, The Oceans Are Diverse, the champions should be too. And I sent it to the editor, and she was like, "Whoa." And she's like, "That's not what I was expecting." Because she was expecting like me to comment on why sea surface temperatures are rising, what's happening with fish stocks. And I was like, I'm sorry, but like, this is what's happening. This is what's driving all of that. And she read it and she said, you know what? Like, this is not a perspective I thought about. And this is something that is far more powerful than this usual narrative that we put out there. And so I was really thrilled to be able to, well, to be invited, but also to be able to write this and get this through the cracks, essentially, right? But at the same time, in 2023, both in December, I also published this paper called Towards Equity and Justice in Ocean Sciences, along with a bunch of colleagues. And what we did was we basically did a review on a bunch of the literature that had been written in the marine space, but also looking at other fields, like the medical field, for example, where they're more ahead of us in terms of thinking about equity and stuff. And we try to bring these together so we can help people think through different actions that they can take to make a difference. And so what I've done here, typically this is a double ringed circle, and the outer ring has the actions. But today I've taken them, I've hidden them because we're going to have a discussion. And I would love to hear what people's actions are, right? Reflecting on these categories. So we have reshaping education, perceptions, attitudes, and working environments. So I'll give you an example of an action here. Creating safer spaces, right? For particularly when you think about field. We all know that there's historically been a lot of harassment that happens in the field context. And so really one of the actions is like, how do we take action to make sure that spaces are safer? And we, of course, refer to some of the amazing literature that's been written around this. Also, rebalancing partnerships and collaborations. So co-production, for example, science analysis and publication, being inclusive of all the languages, strengthening capacity, whether it's low-cost tools, development, for example, so that more people have opportunity to do that work in their backyard and also lead the work that happens in their backyard. And networking and public engagement, right? So, highlighting ocean heroes, local ocean heroes, because like I said, representation really matters. And I have seen that through my own life. I never set out to set an example. I set out originally on what somewhat might say a selfish path. I want to be a marine conservationist. I want to develop the field in Sri Lanka so I could work in Sri Lanka. But in so doing, it has changed the perception of people in my country. It has opened doors to so many things. And young people now more than ever before want to go into marine sciences. And they know that they don't have to just be a doctor, lawyer, engineer, and a business person. Marine science is also on the cards. So, it's helping people diversify their thoughts and their imaginations in many ways. So we'll kind of reflect on this during the breakout rooms. So I'm not going to go into so much detail, but I would really love to hear what actions you all think could fall into these categories, or if there are categories that we've missed. And we suggest actions for 4 groups. The research community, you might see yourselves in more than one of these. Funding agencies, money really drives a lot of good behavior, but a whole lot of bad behavior, right? There's irresponsible funding where people might give money and just get there. All they want is the project, the end product, but they don't care about how that money has been spent and who has been compensated and not. So that's really problematic. They might give you funding and then be like, oh, I'm going to give you money, but you need to spend 60% of that on a consultant of our choosing from our country. That's happened to me and I've refused funding as a result. Publishers, right? Like the publisher perish model is quite damaging because that often drives people to want to be the first author. So it's not about creating spaces for others. It's about how many papers can I publish as a first author. And so it's driven really by the systems that are in place and that we need to figure out how to circumvent, and institutions, right? What do the institutions want? So it's again that publisher perish. So, those go hand in hand. So that's where I'm going to wrap up because I think we have we've got some time for questions and answers, but also, I think it's far more interesting than listening to me is to kind of actively participate in the discussion. One thing I will say is there's no wrong answers. I think it's really important to recognize that because there's a lot of things that many of us may not have thought about in how to combat this. And there's lots of different viewpoints. And I'll highlight again, I talk about the global north, global south parachuting, but there can be, parachuting within a country, a large country, right? You live in one part and you fly across to another part, and then you decide what's best for the people on the ground, and that may not work, right? It might be researchers going to indigenous communities and telling them what to do when they have thousands of years of knowledge already, right? So there is parachuting can happen in so many different forms. And I use this example because it is very personal. It is what my journey has kind of found a challenge, and it's what stemmed my interest in working more on this equity side of things. And the thing is, what I also tell people often is, if you are able to just do marine science and be a marine biologist, that was the dream for me. But unfortunately, now I find myself more and more having to fight for a seat at the table, not just for myself, but people like me. And to me, that's super frustrating because I also want the privilege of just doing science. And I believe that if we want to save our oceans, every coastline needs a local hero. So thank you.
I love all the applause from everyone. Thank you so much for your talk, Asha. Thank you for being just so open with us about your experiences with parachute science and really showcasing your efforts, to increase diversity and equity in science. So I think we have time for a few questions. If anyone has any questions, you can either put them in the chat and I will share through that, or if you want to raise your hand, we can actually have folks unmute and ask. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
really like questions. Oh, we have someone? Okay, great.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, hey, sorry. Yeah, very interesting talk. It's actually something what you mentioned in between. It's at the moment it's a systematic problem we have at hand, kind of. And I really second this. And I mean you can see from my face, right? I'm a white man, so kind of fitting this scheme a bit. But then I'm involved in a project which is funded, just as an example, by the German ministry. And this whole funding scheme really dampens the whole enthusiasm because it's not intended to share money with people overseas. So I was just wondering, because this is a question I've been asking myself throughout the last 4 years quite often, like how I cannot change the system like until tomorrow, right? It's a process. And the question is, we have this problem, we have the symptomatic, but we might not be able to change it until tomorrow, but maybe in a few years. How do we deal with the symptomatic at the moment? I'm not even sure you have an answer to this, but I'm always wondering myself, like how is it possible in such a restrictive system sometimes? Because whatever I tried, I usually go like in gray areas of contracts, and I don't know if everyone is very happy about that. So I'm wondering, like, do you have any advice there, or maybe any example you could share, or I don't know. That
okay. So you were right. I don't necessarily have the answer. But first of all, I want to say this is not don't feel guilty, okay? You are who you are. And just being here tells me that you are conscious of the existing problems and you are an ally and you want to make a difference. So this is not, I'm not here to guilt anyone. I'm here because I want all of us to work together, okay? So, but I also appreciate your courage for speaking up about it, like the struggle that you have. I think it's a tough one. We are stuck in systems, right? Like that's what I was saying, this whole publish or perish model. Like everyone's like, I got to publish this paper so I don't get tenure, right? So like everyone's like flurrying and trying to get to like places that nothing has been studied because that gives you a higher chance of getting paper, whatever, I don't have good advice. What I can say is maybe as a thought, and maybe that's something we can even think about in our rooms, is if you can't provide funding, there may be other things you can provide, right? Whether it's training in like everything you can do, right? So that these people on the ground are enhanced, their technical capacity is enhanced, whether it's inclusive authorship, right? How do you include them in your authorship, particularly people who might have aspirations for a career in the field? Like these are, so you think about other things and recognizing that it would be great to be able to give them some compensation, which I think it is important. And then also maybe, maybe through the Coral Reef Society or whatever, there are small grants, right? A few $1,000s that you can apply for on the side, which then can let you compensate people for their time and efforts. I'm thinking on the spot. I think it's a great question and something that I might like to think about more as well. But I hope those are kind of things that feel like they might something. You're not helpless. I think I think I mean, I can't emphasize enough how much just having people who are conscious of this issue and how it's kind of perpetuated really bad narratives is so important to me. So again, thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, quite a few of the things you just mentioned we try to implement, but it's sometimes just tough to, you work against windmills and
But don't give up, because the more we push, the more other people start pushing. That's the change, right? And it's always hard at the start. Like I'm telling you, the first time I stood up on a stage and I spoke about this was like at IMCC, International Marine Conservation Congress, right? They invited me. Sorry, I'm derailing everything, but I'll just as an example, I was invited as a keynote speaker to talk about the blue whale work that I do. And I was like, if someone's going to give me a stage to speak, like I'm going to use it on behalf of as many people as possible, right? Because like I can talk about my blue whale work, but you can also read my papers, right? Like that's out there. But this is not something that anyone's talking about. And I remember I wrote this like super vague abstract, and everyone was like, "So what are you going to talk about?" I'm like, "You'll soon find out." And I was afraid, right? Because I was like, "How is it going to be received?" Like, and then I thought to myself, "What's the worst that can happen? They might never invite me back for the meeting. That would look worse on them than me." So I was like, "Cool, I'm just going to go for it." And I spoke about this, and it was remarkable. People, that started like this little wave of change. Like people came to me and they were like, "I didn't realize I was doing this," or people came to me and were like, "I've experienced this," right? And it just gives a voice. So even if you're just talking about it amongst your colleagues, having those discussions, being like, "You know what, I think we need to do this, we need to do this better," whatever, those are all like, never underestimate the baby steps, right? And that's what I'm saying. And as long as you keep trying and you keep pushing against that wall, it's going to crack. It will crack at some point. Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Great question and really interesting conversation. We have just a couple questions in the chat, and I think I'll just pose one last one really quick, and then we can go ahead and transition. Samuel Chan in the chat asks, do you think that the situation around parachute science has changed much in the last few years since your paper, and what evolution have you seen?
You know what? So since I started talking about this, so I think I started like on stages and publicly kind of bringing this topic up like in 2015, 2016. So almost 10 years. And definitely attitudes have changed. I see more people thinking about it as an issue, understanding that it's a systemic problem that needs resolving. I've gathered more allies, right? Like people from the global north who are like, right, like let's move together, right? And that's what we need. It's like numbers, right? And like, so I did that keynote in IMCC, and I went back to IMCC last year in Cape Town. And like now they have like sessions where like equity is like woven in. And I was like, this is nuts. This is not what I saw when I went for the meeting at the start. So I think it's great. I have learned in my career that we cannot ask for overnight change, but we can ask for baby steps that will take us to that change. And we have to celebrate the small wins on the way so we don't lose perspective and start to flail and think that we're not achieving anything. So yeah, I definitely see change. And I'm really excited about this, especially the young generation, where you guys have a deeper consciousness because your careers are you're still building your careers. And I think you're in such a beautiful place to be the change makers.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think we're going to go ahead and transition. I know we have a few more questions, and hopefully we can answer those in discussion and continue to talk about all of that. But I'm going to go ahead and bring up our transition slides here. So we're now going to be transitioning to the discussion section. So I just wanted to share a few guidelines for how we want these conversations to be approached. I think a lot of this is very common knowledge, but we just want to make sure that everyone is on the same page. So some quick discussion guidelines. First, we're all going to use just one voice at a time, so one person speaking. Everyone should use I statements, sharing from your own experience. You want to make space and take space, really be aware of how much you're speaking throughout the conversation. Correct gently if someone says something that is incorrect or offensive, but please do make sure to correct. Really lean into discomfort. I know, especially in coral reef science, a lot of us have experience either being on the perpetuating end or the receiving end of parachute science, and these topics can be really challenging, but we want you to really be willing to learn. We want to assume best intentions from everyone, but honor the impact if you do make a mistake or say something offensive. And then avoid generalizations. If you're not sure if something is a fact, you can always pose it as a question. So for our breakout room discussions, again, we're going to focus around three main themes. First, starting with reflection for the first 15 minutes, then moving into strategies, and then building a plan. When you first make your first contribution within the group, just take that minute to introduce yourself and share, where you're coming from and who you are. And you probably will not have time to discuss all of the questions. We put a lot of them out there, but please just choose those that resonate with you. Awesome. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for participating in the discussion. It was so cool to get to see all of the responses being typed in the Google Docs and all of the thoughtful responses that were being shared. So I think now we just have a little bit of time for sharing among the whole group. So if we could maybe just hear from one person from each of the breakout rooms to share one takeaway that you all had from your conversations. It can be about any of those responses. Yeah, maybe we'll start with breakout room number 1.
So yeah, we were having a bit of discussion at the end there, still finishing off. So I wanted to ask if anyone who was wanting to speak at the end of my breakout room would like to finish off sort of what they were saying to the wider group.
Okay, so I was the person who was trying to finish off, and I'm really glad that Juan Mayorga put in his definition of parachute science. Now, I'm afraid I came into this completely ignorant, and I had some inclination of people in what is known as the global south. I think that's what the term is used. Had about foreigners coming in, that's global north, and doing the work. And so I thought to myself, well, what is it with the science? Can someone show me a paper, a parachute science paper, and compare it to a non-parachute science paper? There must be something to do here with the quality of the work that's done, or, science is science as far as I'm concerned. So I would recommend that this is a total misnomer. The gripe here is against parachute scientists and the organizations that they belong to. And as Juan said right at the end of our session, the mindset or the attitude that they have towards the so-called global south. And I think that bothers me as a scientist. I think you should call a spade a spade. Asha says she doesn't mind difficult conversations. Well, you know, talk about that. Don't talk about it as science. That's just to me total nonsense. You're just using weasel words to get around what your gripe and problem is, and that is about these foreigners coming in and doing the science. So that's what I've taken from that. I think that there's Ray Buckley said in our session that he comes away with the feeling that these people who go in and do this science are bad people because everything about it is kind of selfish. Well, in my experience, it's unbelievably difficult to get competent locals to do stuff. And it's partly because the lack of competence, which is not their fault, but it's also because they're just not really interested. And therefore they rely on, us white foreigners, let's call a spade, coming in and trying to do something for the environment. And to me, that is what's important. It is that the science that is done is good. Yep, we need to get everybody on board. I understand that. There's a lot of woke talk that goes on, and all right, fine. I'm gray-haired and I'm from a different generation. But I think the focus ought to be on what these scientists are actually doing and achieving for the environment. And I haven't heard any of that at all in this conversation, which I actually find quite distressing. I've said enough.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think, Asha, if you want to respond or if we want to just move on to the other breakout rooms.
I'm just gonna say we say parachute science, and that's kind of like globally acknowledged because it's the output of the parachute scientists coming in, and that's why the output, it may not be bad science, but it is, if you look into it, it is inequitable, it is skewed, it comes with a different perspective, and that is problematic. As someone, and not just me, I mean, lots of people who've experienced it, and we're going to have differing views because we're definitely from different demographics, different groups. And that's also fine. I have no problem that we have different views. But I do think that the conversation around this is growing for a reason. More people are seeing that it is problematic, that it has historically been problematic. And it's not that we don't have people who are not capable. It is because they have been denied opportunities, because opportunities have been taken, because people have come from outside and assumed a lack of competence. And it distresses me to hear people talk about local communities as incompetent and lacking competence and not being interested, because that is not accurate. And I know that because I have worked in a lot of places with a lot of people, talked to a lot of people, and we are going to obviously differ on this point. And I don't think we need to go on about it, but that is my perspective in response to your perspective.
Thank you. Emma, I'd love to hear from you.
I just wanted to very briefly just say that my take on this whole thing is that like we haven't talked about the specific science that's going on because that isn't the point of this conversation. The science is always going to happen. The science is the science, whoever does it. The point of this conversation is to get more people involved and to get the people who live in the area that we're studying to be able to study it. You know, it's like just because we're not talking about the specific science right now doesn't mean that we're not doing it, doesn't mean that we're not thinking about it, doesn't mean that we're not talking about it generally. But the right now is like the problem is there are so many people who would be and could be and are scientists who are not being included in science just because of where they're from, when the place they're from is the place we're studying, and that was the aim of this conversation that I took.
Well, that's fine, and that's where the conversation went. My point is just call it something else, you know. I think the other word for it, what was it? Colonial science or something? That's so deprecating. I mean, it's so negative. You've got to come out of this in a much more positive light. Don't, instead of pointing at, you know, pictures of people who were all explorers, but they all happened to be white and from, you know, the north. And then to say things like, wait a second, I've got a little quote here, that they just didn't look like me. I mean, this is, you know, it's bordering on, like, almost bordering on racism to go down that route. You shouldn't be going down there. If you got this problem, then label the problem properly and talk about the problem as such.
Are you saying that science has not been racist? I think, you know, this is part of the problem. I think part of the problem is you know, dismissing the concerns of people who are raising concerns. And I think, you know, if you're having a hard time finding local collaborators, it's probably because there's a problem. You're either not trying hard enough, there aren't enough training opportunities, there hasn't been enough investment of time and effort and resources in that community. So I think we can argue about terminology and semantics, but I think that's sort of beside the point.
Thank you so much. I'd love to hear from Mark, and then we'll hear from Asha to close out. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your perspectives. And I think this conversation really shows that we all have a lot of learning to do.
Thank you. I think one of the things that I heard today that I just loved was Asha's reframing of capacity building to capacity sharing. Because while, yes, there is building that's going on, it's building up of communities in terms of Western scientific expertise, knowledge, equipment, capacity, those things that are needed to do science. The recognition that the local people are the experts in their environment, that they have knowledge to provide on the organisms and the systems in which people are coming and visiting to work in, but even more importantly, are providing that expertise on the society, on the framing, on the cultural background in which the people are living in that environment provides things that someone coming in from the outside could never have. And so, if nothing else, that idea of capacity sharing is one that I will definitely take away.
Perfect. Can I just say a few words? Is that good, Maya? Okay.
Yeah.
Just to say thank you. This has been a really great conversation. I'm sorry that it was so short. Like, I walked into the rooms and some of the questions you asked are, lots of things for us to think about. And as someone who's been thinking about this for 10 years, I still have a lot to learn, and I acknowledge that. And by sitting in rooms like this with people like you, who I can see are eager to see a tide of change, who want to be part of the change, and proudly so, I think that's beautiful. And that's what gives me hope in the work that I do. And just knowing that we all have a place in it, but it's how we do the work we do that matters ultimately in the end. And just making sure that we're not, they say, if you want to go far, you go, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together, right? That famous saying. And that's what this is. It is about us going far. This is about us actually putting our egos aside and thinking about the greater good of the planet. And for the greater good of the planet, we have to build enormous teams and giant legacies that can surpass us. So when we die, it doesn't end, it continues. And recognizing the power of local people, talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. And we have it within ourselves. We all carry different kinds of privilege. We have it within ourselves to make opportunity in different ways that can drive this change. And I appreciate all of you for walking into this room today, open-minded, open-hearted, willing to discuss, having difficult conversations, and just wanting to be that tide of change. And I'm super thrilled. I'm so excited that I walked into this room and I agreed to do this. And I thank you, and I hope we can continue the conversation. I hope I meet you all personally someday so that we can sit and celebrate together this amazing power that we have within us to do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
so much.
Dr.
I
Ross.
really just want to extend another huge thank you and round of applause from all of us for your seminar, for your openness, and for your advocacy. I know really that this is just the start of many conversations, like you were saying, and we really hope that all of you bring this conversation into your communities, and really bring the things you learned today into your future research. I really encourage you all to read more of Asha's published work, and I know we'll be sharing some of that with all of you. I also want to thank all of you for your thoughtful participation in the workshop today. It was really amazing to read through those notes and see not only the diversity of experiences, but all the diversity ideas that everyone had. Lastly, this talk has been recorded, and we will collate all the information from the Google Docs and share that, as well as the recording, with everyone who registered, as well as on ICRS social media. And then the last thing that I want to share is we do have a feedback survey for your experience with the workshop today, that we'd love it if you could take a second to fill that out. So I will go ahead and pop that up. And yeah, thank you so much. We really appreciate all of you being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for organizing.
Thank you.
Thank
guys
you
so
so
much.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.